press.
So hi everybody, this is Dr. Sneath here, reporting from the breakfast bar at Building 10. I've just admiring your collection of vanilla almond clusters and trail mix and everything. And with me in the breakfast is Karen Corby and Lauren Lavoie. And you guys run the breakfast bar, is that right? Is that your kind of main function as far as Avalon's concerned? Or
yeah,
what do you do?
People.
Tell us a little bit about yourselves. And kind of move a little closer if you wouldn't mind.
Xbap, that's what it's all about.
Breakfast Xbap.
Yeah. We are both program managers on the Windows Presentation Foundation team. I work on the application model, kind of how we build apps and how we distribute them, how you could distribute them to your customers, as well as a lot of the sort of top-level UI constructs like Windows and hosting in the browser and things like that.
So that's things like the XAML browser application.
That's one of those things that we work on.
Right.
Yeah.
And Karen, just describe yourself a little.
So I am also a PM on WPF. I own security as well as a partial trust sandbox. So when you're deploying an Xbap, you're running the sandbox. So what does a PM do? Just tell me a little bit about how the day-to-day kind of role of a PM shapes up.
I think the cool thing about the PM is there is no typical day-to-day thing. The general idea is that we kind of own the requirements, the scenarios, kind of general justification and driving of features, which is cool because you get to have a lot of say on the design and the usage of stuff, but it also ends up being very technical.
Right.
I mean, the other aspect of it that Karen mentioned that I think is really interesting is that there is no typical day. So I might come here in the morning with some idea of what I'm going to work on and then find out that there's something else I need to do that's actually a lot more important. But it means we get to do different things all the time, and it's basically doing what needs to be done to get our set of features out the door.
So I mean, I guess Mini Microsoft always talks about downsizing Microsoft by eradicating the program managers. What would we miss if you guys weren't working here?
That's, wow.
We specifically were working here?
Apart from the breakfast.
You're like, actually, we're firing you on camera.
We figured it would be good to do first Channel 9 firing.
Yeah. That is a good question. I think that there are a lot of things involved in just driving the end-to-end process in terms of understanding a lot of the initial customer requirements, understanding the scenarios, and how we actually drive that and turn that into a set of features. And a lot of that is things that really I think some of our developers either don't have the time to think about, don't want to think about. Our job is to make sure that those things sort of happen and that we know what we're building and make sure we're building the right things so that we empower our developers and our testers to go build it and test it and get it out the door with the right level of quality. Right. So in a sense, we sometimes bring a lot of the sort of higher level view to things, but
so your goal is to kind of protect the developers from randomization.
Sometimes. I mean, a lot of the time it's dependency management, protecting people from randomization, making sure that that people know what to work on and that they're working on the right things.
Right,
so
right.
I think we'd have a bit of chaos around here without the films.
Right. Well, for the hardball questions, I kind of want to find out a little bit about Xbaps, which are kind of is one of the cool features, I guess, in Windows Presentation Foundation, and also something that I think a lot of people don't really know about. So tell us, what is an Xbap?
So kind of the XAML browser applications, or Xbaps, are one of the three ways that you can get kind of Avalon content out to people. Xbaps are full-blown WPF applications that run in the browser. They're sandboxed, and they're not installed, which means they're just cached on your machine. So if I go to something on a web page and it has to be an Xbap, I'll see it, I'll get to experience it, and then I navigate away.
Right.
Right. And because it is sandboxed and because it's not installed, it doesn't require any kind of trust prompt. So your user can go navigate from any HTML page or any other content they're viewing in the browser directly to one of these Xbapps, and they get a seamless browser experience. There's no prompt. You can just navigate to it as though it's any other web page. And you can be confident that it can't harm your user's machine because of the work we've done to sandbox the WPF features.
So it's a bit like an ActiveX control in that it's an application that's running, but it's not HTML or anything like that.
Correct. It's not HTML. It's a full-blown WPF application, the same thing you'd get if you were building a standalone app.
Right.
But it's hosted inside the browser, and it's able to use the set of features that we've enabled inside the Partial Trust Sandbox.
Okay.
So it's more scoped from a security standpoint.
Uh-huh.
And the modeling is slightly different from an ActiveX control in this version because we are only hostable kind of top level in the browser or in an iframe. And ActiveX controls can float in different places.
Right. So you can have one of these that is just a part of the window, or using the whole window.
Yeah.
Okay. So what distinguishes an Xbap from a regular WPF application, or why would I want to pick an Xbap over just building a standalone rich client application?
Do you want to take that
Sure.
question?
I mean, there are a lot of different reasons. I think one of the sort of obvious reasons is that I think there are a lot of applications out there that are granted a lot more trust than they necessarily need. And I think if you're building an application that doesn't necessarily need to go do some of the things that aren't available in the sandbox, we can get into more of those things later. If it doesn't need to go right to arbitrary locations in the file system, or do other certain things that require more trust from your user, then it's a great way to get your bits down to your user's machine and get them using your app without them having to accept any scary trust prompts or anything like that.
Right.
There's kind of a higher barrier to entry for an application that has to be installed. Your users definitely need to trust you and trust you as a publisher and trust that that application isn't going to do anything.
Right.
And in general, they have to be willing to go install something. With an Xbap, it's the same level of overhead as far as the user is concerned as a web page.
Right.
There are other reasons too if you want to get into any of them. I mean, that touches also on ease of deployment in general.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the general idea that there are just apps that make sense that you want to use, but you don't want to use every day, or you don't want to include your start menu. So that kind of goes to the uninstall and install, but it's also lowering the barrier to entry. So I could have a version of my app that runs as an Xbap that's very focused, just to kind of entice people enough to want to experience the whole thing all day, every day. Well, maybe not all day, every day, but more than just temporarily or infrequently. And at that point, you can leverage the same code base to offer an installed version as well.
Right.
I think philosophically as well, there's also this feeling that there are certain apps that belong in the browser as opposed to on the desktop. And I think we've talked to a lot of customers who've felt this way about certain types of applications that they don't necessarily want another full-blown application for with its own top-level UI.
Right.
People want the experience of being in the browser and not going and installing something new, but simply using that same UI that they're really accustomed to.
Right. So we've got this sort of model in that allows you to run a browser-based application that's using WPF and XAML and all those kind of things. But I mean, I remember at the PDC we talked about WPFE, this thing that is WPF everywhere. So we've got two different things. What's the point of Xbap? What's the point of WPFE? When would I choose to use one versus the other?
That's a very good question.
That's why I asked it.
Good job, Tim. So I think there are a couple of things that are interesting there. And perhaps we should go into a little more detail on WPFE, just in case people don't necessarily know what that is. But Windows Presentation Foundation Everywhere is a cross-platform, cross-browser subset of what's available in WPF.
Right.
And I don't know exactly the set of features that will be available in
WPF
versus WPF, but it will certainly be a subset.
Right.
And it's a great tool for building a lot of the types of smaller web-type applications that you'd see out there today, particularly if you want to go cross-platform and I think eventually cross-device. But
it's specifically aimed, though, at kind of islands of rich content.
Right, that was the impression I got from their model as well. Whereas WPF Xbaps will be about building full-blown applications. And I think that the common model will be top-level applications, or at least larger applications where you wouldn't necessarily have 8 of them living on a page.
Right.
Because they are slightly heavier weight, but also more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot of things in Xbap that you wouldn't just get in WPFE. You get the power of the entire .NET platforms. You get all those APIs. Whereas with WPFE, you're really writing in either a managed language or in JavaScript, but specifically against just the OM of your content.
Right.
So it's very powerful, but it's also kind of more limited to the types of scenarios that you can enable.
Right. So what does WPF Xbap, what do you need to run an Xbap?
From an end user standpoint?
Yeah.
So you have to have Avalon installed.
Right.
And you need to be running, and in order for Avalon to be installed, you have to be on XP, Server 2003, or Vista.
Okay. And so, I mean, I just have XP on my machine and I go browse to a WPF Xbap and it automatically runs, or?
Go ahead. Almost.
Yeah.
If you have IE7 on your machine, you'll get a nice experience where if you don't have .NET Framework 3.0 installed yet, then upon navigating to an Xbap or any other WPF content, and we have several other file types with other file extensions. But upon navigating to any of those, it will trigger an installation of .NET Framework 3.0.
Okay.
Of course, it prompts the user to ask them whether or not they would like to install it. If they do choose to install it, then the bits will be downloaded to their machine and installed, and then when the install is completed, the application will run.
And .NET Framework 3 is the new name for WinFX, which
Correct.
is the thing that contains WPF, which used to be called
Avalon. Very good.
Right.
Can you draw that in a diagram?
So, okay, so I've got XP and I've got IE7. I'm going to automatically get the bits on my machine. I can just kind of browse to it and I'm going to get that kind of thing.
Correct.
What about if I'm on Vista? What happens then?
It just works.
Okay, so I can just literally browse straight out of the box to an Xbap and I'm going to see what I
Get
need
that
to
nice
see.
clean Vista
Okay,
glass. And
cool.
great, yeah.
And what if I haven't got IE7 on my XP machine? What happens then?
We don't have a great default behavior, but one of the things that you can do on the server side is we do put ourselves into the user agent string.
Right.
So if somebody's running IE6 and doesn't have WPF, you can either send down a different version of your page or redirect them.
Right, so I can kind of just sniff the user agent string.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you could even do is just prompt your user to go install .NET Framework 3.0. This is what you'll need to be able to run our application and send them over to the Microsoft download site.
Okay, like you need to ask people to install, I don't know, like Adobe Acrobat or something like
exactly.
that. Okay, cool. So I've got this Xbap sort of capability on my machine then, and you kind of talked about, that there are situations where I might want to have an in-browser experience. I mean, what kind of classical applications do you think are going to be delivered here? What are your first customers going to be building as Xbaps, do you think?
I think that...
Go ahead.
I think that there are a lot of scenarios where WPF offers a lot of things that HTML or other alternatives don't have. So we've got a great reading experience. So we have a flow document technology and a rich typography technology. So you can see a lot of content reading experiences, especially perhaps embedded inside an existing web page. So you can kind of have both of those experiences depending on. I think that we've got a lot of great imaging, like the Windows codecs makes images just beautiful. And we've got a lot of 3D effects. So I could also see, photo sharing is a really popular thing, like having photo viewers in that sort of way.
So like a Flickr kind of application would work well in this kind of context.
Right. And that's kind of in the internet scenario. You can also think of a lot of more rich visualizations or skinning that might need to happen in a line of business application inside of a corporation.
Right.
Where maybe branding is important if you're an ISV, or customization on whether you're an admin or a user, that sort of thing. But those were one of the scenarios where ease of deployment and being in the browser kind of just makes sense.
Right. So I guess, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the in-depth architecture of the deployment model. I mean, what happens when you browse to an Xbap? But before we do that, I also kind of want to see some demos or see something that just kind of shows what Xbaps look like. Do you have anything you can show us?
So if you go this way.
Okay.
So we've got a machine running Vista Beta 2 right now.
Okay, this is just the regular Beta 2 build that anybody can get hold of.
Yes.
Right.
And I've got a couple different apps that I personally think are kind of cool coming off of my blog site. So Woodgrove is a finance company, and one of the different things, if you click here, is we're first being taken to just a loose XAML page. So one of the other ways you can deploy Avalon content in the browser is just a straight XAML page, and I can navigate to it. But then if I click on this hyperlink, I'm going to go to a finance Xbap, and so you can see kind of all my financial information.
Cool.
I've got a really rich 3D graph in the browser that kind of really makes sense if I'm trying to compare things. and some nice transitions.
So this is all running using WPF, right? This is in browser, but there's no HTML or anything, or Flash or things like that?
Nope, this is pure WPF.
Okay.
But one of the other things that you can do that we talked a little about before is you can have an Xbap or a piece of loose YAML embedded into an iframe. So you actually have HTML all around here.
Right.
And this right here is Avalon.
Okay.
And that's a flow document.
Yeah, so why would I want to host Avalon content there?
So one of the things that we offer for the reading experience is kind of a dynamic reading experience. So if I'm reading this and I have a very large monitor or hard of sight or whatever, I can zoom in and out, and it can lazily redirect or lazily lay out how many columns that you want. The other thing is you don't lose screen real estate by scrolling, so I can actually just navigate by clicking next.
Yeah, no, I agree. Another thing I'd point out is that loose XAML and particularly flow or 3D content is just a great way to enhance an existing site. So, I think what Karen's showing with this demo is that, on the outside, all of the Chrome is your existing HTML-based Chrome, but, we've decided to just gradually or incrementally enhance the site by adding better reading capabilities. You could imagine adding, 3D graphing capabilities like we had in that full-blown app to a site like this as well.
So this basically what we're looking at here, the outer kind of frame of this is all HTML, and it's just that article in the middle that's an Xbap that's running there. Is that right? Is that what you're kind of saying?
So that gives you an enhanced reading experience in the context of an existing HTML-based website. And just going back to your comment about user agent, I can basically then show this to somebody who's say running Windows Vista or running IE7, but on somebody who's running on a Mac, say, or something like that, I could just show like a regular HTML text experience. Exactly.
And that's actually what I did in this demo. So there's a little server-side script that's sniffing the agent string. So if you're on, if you don't have it installed, or it'll show a plain HTML version.
Right. That's very cool. I didn't know you were doing that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Another thing about these types of scenarios, these content-related scenarios that are really interesting, is that I know that many of these types of content-based websites will store their content in XML, and they're doing an XSL transform on the server side usually to convert to HTML. So if you were going to convert to loose XAML, that's really just one more different type of conversion to do with XSL to convert it to loose XAML instead of HTML.
So just talk about this loose XAML thing, because we kind of just elided into that a little bit. What is loose XAML? That's not an Xbap then?
It's technically not an Xbap, although
we're using some of the same technology.
It is using much of the same technology to run. But loose XAML is pretty much what it sounds like. It's just a XAML page, and XAML is our markup language for creating WPF applications, that is not compiled. You can simply deploy it as a loose file, put it up on your server, and someone can navigate to it the way they would navigate to an HTML page.
Right. Okay. So when you're looking at an app like this, the nice thing about that is that you've got this kind of rich experience that you're describing. But how do I kind of how do I build something like that? What would I be doing if I was looking to develop this? I would develop the HTML just using the same way as normal, would I? And then I would develop this. How would I go about developing the center part of the frame?
I think it again depends on whether you're kind of doing just a pure reading experience where an XSLT transform and like just some loose files would suffice. If like in the finance app you're trying to build something much richer that really requires like code, I think you determine whether you want to be top level or not, and then you use our Visual Studio extensions to be able to create an Xbap using one of our templates.
Right.
And then, depending on what your bends are and everything else, you can also open that same project in Expression.
Right.
To kind of snazz up the visuals.
Okay, cool. Do you have any other demos you want to show? Or?
Do you want to drive your...
Sure. So, this is a demo that I showed at TechEd in Boston, so some people might have already seen this. And I'll show you actually inside of Visual Studio once we get started. Take a look at some of the XAML here.
Okay, so we're looking at real XAML right now.
This is some real XAML.
Drum roll, please.
Drum roll, please. And let me see which parts of this were actually interesting. That page 1, I think, is not that interesting. And, oh, see, you can see this is a real demo here. This is the designer living inside of Visual Studio, which is certainly coming along but doesn't know yet how to read this file. So we're just going to go look at the XAML instead.
Okay.
And so what this application is a travel application based on kayak.com.
Mm-hmm.
And kayak.com, if you have never seen it, is a very cool travel website that you can use to just go search every other travel website, basically. It scrapes all of the other sites and it gives you all of the data in real time with just search results coming in. And we thought this would be a pretty cool WPF app to do some data visualization with the travel data that comes back. And we were able to do this because kayak.com exposes a couple of APIs that we can use, and they're all just HTTP GET based. So we make a couple of calls back to the server and we get back a ton of data. And the main aspects of this app are this first page that I have here, which is a search page, and I won't go through all of it, but it's basically a search form, which is pretty simple, and then the results page, which has all of the search results that come back, and again, I'll have to switch back to the XAML view. And the main UI of the results page is just a list box, and you'll see it's going to be a pretty fancy stylized list box. But what we're doing is we're data binding the item source of that list box to a set of trips that come back from our search query. And we have an item template that is going to enable us to do all the data visualization. So with that very quick intro, I'll show you how the app looks. So here's Kayakalon running in the browser, and yes, the name is a little play on our code name. And I have a couple of options here for a search. So say I'm going to fly from Seattle to Newark, which in fact I did last week, and I'm going to do that in October in the morning, and I'm going to come back a few days later around noon, and I want to fly coach. So I'll go do a search. Yeah, you're disappointed you wanted me to fly first class.
Gotta live it up.
And here are my search results, and I come back and I get this cool timeline panel. So this is the data visualization that I was talking about. We have done all of this just using a data template. And I can scroll down and just see all the results that have come in.
And this is live, right? This is using these live services.
This is live data coming in from kayak.com. And it might have already come in already, but you might have noticed at the beginning that I had fewer results and the size of my little scroll bar thumb actually changed as more results came in. And I'm capping this at a certain number of results because otherwise I'd get thousands of them.
Right.
But if I was to build this out as a more full-blown application, we would do something more sophisticated with pagination or something of those results.
Right. So I'm kind of looking at kind of like a timeline kind of view, and I can see which ones.
So Robbie Ingebrigtsen on our team wrote this panel, which we call a timeline panel, which just lays out these different items here, and he helps with a lot of the visuals on this app. But it's a pretty simple application. It's one that we thought was pretty cool as a browser experience. It also has a little login procedure here, so that I can log in. And once I've done that, if I were to go rerun my search, I actually have the ability, once we get there, to save this search. This button didn't appear before, but now that we're logged in and I have my search results, I can save this search in case I decide that I actually want to go complete it later.
And where does that get stored?
And so that, when I save it, I mentioned earlier that Xbaps can't write to arbitrary locations in the file system, but what they can do is use isolated storage. Isolated storage is a .NET Framework 2.0 concept. It just gives me a place for my application to go store some data that is my application's own little store, and the location is obfuscated, so I don't know where that is, and I have a limit on it, so that I can go safely store something in a way that other applications can't necessarily access, and so that I can't go beyond the bounds of what is safe and secure.
Right.
The other interesting thing about isolated storage is if I upgrade my app, then isolated storage gets versioned with the application as well.
And how big is my isolated storage? How much space have I got to write to?
I believe it's 128.
It's 512.
Oh, it is 512. 512K.
K, right.
In the Internet Sandbox.
Gigabytes.
Yeah. And interestingly, it's the same size as a cookie.
Okay, right, fine. So, we've kind of talked a little bit about security there and about the fact that you've got this app that's now kind of running out the browser. I mean, we've, perhaps rightly in the past been panned for, security violations and sort of, opening up sort of things. So what have we done in Windows Presentation Foundation? Why do you guys feel so confident? How do you sleep at night, basically?
We've done a lot of work into figuring out how to secure the sandbox. And one of the great things is we've done a lot of work so that hopefully our end developers then don't have to worry about making sure that their apps secure when they're running in the internet sandbox. They can just design their code how they would do it, and they kind of get it for free. The sandbox is built using the .NET framework security. Framework called Code Access Security, or CAS. It's a permission-based system. So it basically says for any sort of action that I want to take, like writing to the file system, there's a permission associated called file I/O permission. And then depending on where I'm deployed, the kind of strength or not at all, the strength of that permission is determined. So from the Internet Sandbox, you don't have any file I/O permission at all. And we've done a lot of work to make sure that all of our APIs are faithful to that. So we don't allow you to find some other way of getting around writing to the file system. You really have to have that permission.
Right.
That being said, there are some APIs that we've offered, or functionality that we offered, bless you, that kind of enables you to still have metered access. So we've done work on the open file dialog. So somebody in the sandbox can show the file dialog. They'll get a file stream.
Right.
They won't actually know the path of where that file came from because it was just the user going through. And when I get returned back, it's just the stream and the file name itself.
Right.
So we've done some work like that in V1. We want to, of course, do more of that in future versions as well.
Right. And so the intention of all of that work was to enable features inside the sandbox that people want to use, but to enable them in such a way that applications can't go do malicious things with them.
Right. Now, say I'm building an intranet application, I kind of want to do a bit more than that. I want to write to a network share or something like that. How granular is this stuff? Can I do some stuff like that?
Oh, that's a great question. Karen, I think you're more the expert on it than I am.
So the granularity is very fine there, and there's a different set of permissions in the intranet than in the internet that's slightly larger because there's a little bit more level of trust when you're deployed inside of the core net. For Xbaps, there are, because Xbaps, we didn't really touch on this so far, are just click once applications.
Right.
So we follow that same kind of zone deployment model.
So that's the .NET Framework 2.0 kind of model that they introduced there, right?
Yeah.
So in other parts of the framework, like WinForms, you've got this MMC snap-in where you can choose sort of policy by policy whether something's got access to the clipboard or whether they've got access just to a quoted clipboard or things like that. Do you have a similar snap-in, or how do I control those things as an enterprise administrator?
As an enterprise administrator, you have access over your CAS policy. I'm less familiar with the MMC snap-in for CAS, but it uses the same mechanism as a WinForms app.
Okay, so there's some kind of like XML configuration file or something that I can set to adjust those settings.
Right.
Okay, and then I guess you can put in all that trust-based sort of security where you're sort of saying, well, I've got this permission and that permission, and that's what I'm going to allow an app to do. But how do you, as a product group, test against people, who are just going to want to defeat those mechanisms? Do you do anything else beyond that kind of level to kind of make sure that people can't? I'm thinking of things like a lot of the common exploits, like SQL vulnerabilities, where people have, done things that nobody was expecting.
Yeah, no, we have on Avalon a dedicated security team. That security team, part of it was enabling the sandbox, but the other part was trying to break the sandbox, so to speak. We've got a really strong test team, and they've spent a lot of time going over our threat models, going over just legacy bugs, so things that we've seen in HTML or GDI or stuff like that, and seeing if we can repro either that specific exploit or something similar.
Right.
And those are things that we, there's kind of precedence around, but they're also trying to be very creative to think about, where are we as a company from a security standpoint moving to, and where is the hacker community in general kind of looking at the new exploits.
Right. So we've had these kind of conferences and things on site where we've had, I forget what they called them now.
Black hat.
Black hat sort of.
Or blue hat.
Blue hat, right. So they're kind of plugged into the hacker scene, are they? Or
yeah, I mean, like, as far as trends or just kind of understanding the types of investigations that are going on, we're definitely have an ear to the ground in that.
Right. So you kind of, you feel comfortable to sleep at night? You feel like this is...
I feel comfortable to sleep. I mean, we've done, I think, all the due diligence that we could, so we feel good.
Right, cool. So you mentioned Click Once. I mean, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, I'm kind of keen to understand, from the moment I click on like that kayak application, through to actually going through to actually executing on your machine. I mean, what kind of steps take place during those kind of pieces?
Yeah, so and actually the Woodgrove application is probably the best one for us to walk through because we actually have that posted up on Karen's website, and from there we can talk about what happens in the process of when the user clicks on it and then how the bits get down to the machine.
So you can run that Woodgrove app directly off the web.
Yeah, so actually anyone who's watching this video can go to Karen's website.
We'll post a link up on
we'll post a link up. Can go and deploy that application and run it on your machine as long as, of course, you have .NET Framework 3.0.
Okay.
But should we just walk through the steps? Do you want to whiteboard it?
Yeah, that'd be great. Let's move the camera around and just have a bit of a reconfigure.
Okay.
Who's going to whiteboard?
I think there's one over there. Do you want to set that?
No, I want you to
All right.
draw.
So, we can grab two markers and kind of duel here or something if we need to. So, here's your website. So, we'll just go with what we had before. So, scorbs.com, Karen's website. Now you don't need to put a link up on Channel 9. And from here, she has a hyperlink that points to the Woodgrove app. So say there's a link, and you go click on it. So what this actually points to is the .xbap file, .xbap. And when you click on this file, we have some logic that will tell you to go, that will tell our system to go and grab the rest of the files that you need in order to launch that application.
So maybe do so they're kind of at least 3 files associated with an Xbap. Yeah. There's actually the .xbap file. There's the .exe .manifest file. And then there's the actual exe and whatever other satellite DLLs or resources. This is the deployment manifest. This kind of says, this is the version of the Zap, and this is where you find the application manifest. Right. The application manifest also has the version number, or I believe it has the version number, but definitely has the version number of all the assemblies as well as where those are. So it makes sure that the correct version of the app as well as its parts are sucked down.
So if there's like a DLL or something like that, then that's also embedded there, is it? Or
yeah, it's linked to.
Okay.
So here it's got a link to the exe, it'll have a link to DLLs.
Right.
Perhaps images that you have as loose files.
Okay, like the resources and things.
Or XML files even.
It could be any other resources that you've bundled into your application.
So a .xbap, that's actually like an XML file itself, is it?
Yeah, that is an XML file, and so is the manifest.
Right. And then, so the browser kind of knows that that's an XBAP. That is like a WPF application somehow, does it?
Yeah, we've registered the MIME type.
Yeah. Okay. And so what you're doing here is you're actually invoking the procedure that's going to go and from the XBAP we'll go grab the manifest. From the manifest we'll go figure out all the other files to grab. There's some other things that Click Once does in the meantime here. For example, an XBAP is considered an online application, which means that you'll always ping the server for the most recent version of the application itself.
Right.
So that's something that Click Once does for us. Is it will go back, it will ping the server and say, hey, is there a new version of that application? If so, it will download the new version and will navigate you to that new version.
Right.
If there isn't a new version, it will check and see if you have a version that's already cached on the machine. And if you do, it will go navigate to that version. So
talk us through that stage then, because I mean, right now, just at the stage we are of this diagram, these purple boxes, they're still on the server. Where do they get? What happens? They get copied to somewhere on the client?
Right. So you have kind of going into here on the client. I'm going to erase this. You have the client machine, and in that you have the Click Once store. And you also have kind of the processes that are running is you have our doc object host, which is presentation
host, yeah.
which we can talk to. But what happens is all those XE and the Xbap and the manifest get sucked down into the Click One store.
Mm-hmm. And then presentation host is kind of an implementation detail that most of you will never need to know about, but this is the guy that sort of does the work to make sure that your application may be hosted in the browser itself.
Right.
So it's a mechanism for hosting in the browser, and it gives us some of the cool features like the ability to integrate with the browser's back and forward buttons and things like that.
Right. So does my Xbap have to be hosted on like an IIS server, or what do I have to do to make this run?
Yeah, your Xbap can be hosted anywhere. I believe the server that Karen's running is running Apache.
Yeah.
Wow. That's very brave.
So, I mean, the only thing you have to do is configure your server to be able to serve up the right MIME types.
Right. So you have to install something just like a MIME type thing on the server to say an Xbap is an application.
Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily need to
whatever.
install anything. On IIS, it's simply a mapping that you need to make in your settings.
Like a .htaccess or a whatever thing.
Oh, yeah, in Apache, I've done it with an htaccess file.
Right.
That works great. So.
And on IIS, it's just, you either go to the config file or you use the tool, the UI.
Right. Okay. So, and then, I mean, this click once cache, I mean, that's just stored somewhere like on my C drive somewhere. It's not like in C program files or anything like that.
No. It's stored somewhere on your machine. You don't ever really need to know about it because it will get scavenged.
Right.
And I don't know exactly what the scavenging scheme is, what the time frame is.
So there's for online only apps, there's a set amount, and when you hit that set amount, it kind of just lazily scavenges out.
So it's like a quoted store of
Exactly.
some kind. Okay.
Yeah. And it's stored under a user profile, so it's per user.
Okay. Cool.
And actually, all Click Once applications are per user.
So so if I've got like 3 different users all using this application, I'm actually it's gonna download it each time to a different secure part of the Click Once store or something. Okay, cool. And then, I mean, you talked about loose XAML, and that works in the same way, presumably, does it? I mean, like the XAML file.
It works in a very similar fashion. Obviously, there's no new application to go install every single time. There's an application that's built into WPF that knows how to view the XAML. And I believe that's called XAML Viewer. And the first time you ever view a loose XAML file, you'll see that application getting installed.
Right.
You'll just see a little progress UI page as you're navigating to it. And after that, you'll have that application installed, and you'll be able to use it, and you'll just navigate seamlessly to those loose XAML files in the browser. Right.
So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we've kind of got an application that is installed on my machine, and I've got. We were talking about kind of communicating across two Xbaps, or hosting like an Xbap inside the HTML frame.
Okay.
So can I kind of do that? I mean, how does that work from an HTML perspective?
Sure. So I'll show you the HTML to write. I don't know if you can see this over here behind the lamp, but I will talk through it. And obviously I might have some other HTML defining my page here, but in general, if I wanted to have an HTML page that maybe has some UI associated with it, but perhaps I want to run an Xbap or a loose XAML file or some other WPF content here, I simply need an iframe that will point to that content. So I have this HTML page that has a frame inside of it, and that frame is pointing to the woodgrove.xbap. It could point to a loose XAML file or whatever else it is you need.
Right.
And it will just load up seamlessly there.
And then can I kind of script against that? Can I
Unfortunately, that is a limitation we have at this point, is there's not a great communication story between that outer HTML and the inner Xbap there. There are a couple of options. One of them is, of course, on startup of this application itself, you can pass URL parameters.
Right.
And so certainly, that's a way to sort of script the startup. But while the application is running, it's not actually scriptable.
Okay. So I've kind of got to kick everything off and then...
Yeah, and then if you need to do some communication on the server side or something like that, there are still ways to work around it, but there's not a great client-only communication story yet.
Right.
You can use IE cookies to do a little kind of minimal communication, but again, as far as the real time, it's more challenging for everyone, and we totally understand that too.
Right. Which kind of brings us on to an interesting kind of question. I mean, where do you plan to go for the next release of Windows Presentation Foundation? What do you want to do with this?
With respect to Xbaps in particular?
Sure.
Yeah. I think we definitely had some feature requests around things that you can't do in the sandbox today. And those are some of the things that we'll have to go certainly address, and we understand some of those pain points. I think that there are a lot of areas around improving integration with server-side, as well as improving integration with HTML and other scenarios like this one that we just talked about that we really want to go after and get right as well.
Right.
Any other thoughts?
I think those are kind of the big ones. So.
Okay, cool. It's been great to kind of chat with you and useful to kind of hear a bit about this. Are there any other kind of resources or places people should be going to kind of look at example Xbaps? I mean, you've got your kind of URL there, so it's scorbs.com, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and we can give you some other links as well, or we can just put them up on the board.
Sure.
There's your site.
Yeah, so I have a couple samples as well, and I haven't posted Kayakalon yet, but I will. So we can just put up these URLs here. So here's mine. And Karen's we mentioned. There's another PM on our team who thinks about a lot of these ideas as well. And I believe he has a Blogspot blog. And so he posts a lot of information about Xbaps and a lot about deployment as well, if you're interested in how ClickOne's deployment works with WPF. And then there's some other great resources out there, people who are out in the community building Xbaps. One we were talking about a few minutes ago, the WPF blog, is great. And he's been posting a lot of his samples of Xbaps. And I believe there are others out there too.
Yeah,
so.
I'm going to say his name wrong. Team, I think. Sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. But he's got a great site too, and we'll put a link up
Who's
there.
that?
He's one of our MVPs. Vilescu is his
okay,
alias.
right,
Yeah,
cool.
but I believe his first name is Valentin.
Okay.
And he has some great samples too. He made a 3D chess app and a portal site that's very cool too.
Nice.
And there are lots of others, so we can try to point to them on the Channel 9
Great.
site as well.
We'll put some of those up directly following the video itself.
That'd be great.
And then there's this is it, right? This is our community site?
Yeah, and specifically WPF.netfx3.com. That's our brand new community website, and there are some samples there, and soon to be many, many more, I'm sure.
Yeah, and there's a great blog there too, so you can kind of see what the team and the community is doing.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.